with us today on the summit.
It's the 12th year now. I'm into the 12th year of Corbett Report. Started in 2007 from very, very humble beginnings. And I am amazed, constantly amazed and I have to pinch myself to think about the ways it has grown since I first started it. And I like to think of it as an object lesson for people out there, that what you do can have resonance and it can make a difference, even if you're just a guy sitting there, as I was when I started this, on a clunky old laptop with a $20 microphone, sitting there in my apartment in Japan. It's amazing to think about, but we are in an age where you can reach people around the world with a very humble setup. And so I'm trying to take advantage of it while I can. And I always encourage other people to do so, because if I can do it, trust me, pretty much everyone out there who's listening to my voice right now could do it.
Yeah, very good. Well, yeah, we definitely collectively, each of us are the change. And so thanks for your example there. And something I have always enjoyed about your work is that you don't do things just to be popular or to have a big following or whatever. You have never done Facebook, right? And so you're just really about the facts and the truth and getting the information to people and empowering people. So thank you for that. And I'm so glad you're here with us today. I will just share your brief bio with our audience and then we'll dive in. So James Corbett has been living and working in Japan since 2004. Originally Canadian, right?
That's right.
From where?
Calgary, Alberta.
Excellent. I'm from near Vancouver.
Well, no one's perfect.
James started
You're not a Nets fan, are you?
Belonged in a previous life. James started the Corbett Report website in 2007, as he mentioned, as an outlet for independent critical analysis of politics, society, history, and economics. Since then, he has written, recorded, and edited thousands of hours of audio and video media for this website, which is corbettreport.com, correct?
That's right.
Including a podcast and several regular online video series. He is the lead editorial writer for the International Forecaster, the e-newsletter created by the late Bob Chapman. So, James, why Japan?
Excellent question. I wish I had an excellent answer for it, but it's really just because I was young and impetuous and wanted to see more of the world. And that's the long and short of it. I didn't have any particular interest in Japan before I came. I'd never really studied Japanese or anything like that. It was literally just a way to spend a year killing time and maybe earning a little bit of money teaching English. And then I was going to come back to Canada and start my real job, whatever that was going to be. Famous last words, because now I've been out here 15 years and I have a family here. And so I'm pretty settled in.
That's excellent. So diving in, what is 5G's relation to the Internet of Things?
So people might be tempted, if they only ever encounter the PR propaganda surrounding the 5G rollout, they might tend to think of it as just another generation of mobile network technology. It's just going to be a neutral mobile network for carrying information from one computer device to another. And of course, we tend to think of computer devices as big clunky things that sit on our desktop, or maybe things that sit on our laptop, or maybe now, it's the little gadgets that we have in our hands. But as each generation of mobile network technology advances, of course, the computers tend to get smaller and smaller until they reach the point where the computer, well, that's kind of a strange concept at this point. Well, what is that? Is it a thing with an embedded RFID chip that can be read and scanned and tracked and databased and cataloged in real time as it moves through the economy? We are getting to the point where absolutely everything in the world that is manufactured can have such a device embedded in it and can have space for such a device to be individually registered via IPv6, which is another technology that helps to enable this Internet of Things that comes along. Basically, everything that exists and has been manufactured can have its own address in the new IPv6 naming convention that is coming along to replace the old one. So literally I was reading a PR piece recently. Every floor tile that is ever manufactured could have its own individual address on IPv6 so they could keep track of it and locate it. This is where 5G comes in, because obviously with that amount of data flowing through the networks, 4G just could not handle that amount of data that quickly, that's being processed in real time, tracked, cataloged, databased, so that essentially this could provide a God's eye view of everything happening in the economy, in the world, really. That's kind of the dream of 5G technology, and that's what it helps to enable. As you say, the Internet of Things, this new vision that's coming together, where it's not just Internet of devices like we are used to, like computers and laptops and phones and tablets. Now it's going to be sneakers and fridges and toothbrushes, and everything you own is going to be part of that internet and going to be broadcasting information at all times. And that is only enabled, that can only be enabled by something like a 5G mobile network.
So do you think that there is a plan in place to have people be part of this Internet of Things and basically microchip everyone and to use biometrics in that level, 5G and the Internet of Things?
Unfortunately, that is where this is heading, and I think that might be a later stage of indoctrination. I think technologically we are already there, and some people are already embedding themselves with chips. There has been a number of waves of PR over the last decade and a half surrounding the Vera chip, for example, and other commercial implementations of this technology. And I've seen stories from bars in Spain and other places that will let people cut in line. You can get in the club if you just embed a chip and they scan it, and you can get in the club early. And these types of stupid PR type events, which are really just promoting this technology and letting the public know it exists and trying to make it seem cool and fashionable, I think they still have a ways to go to really get a lot of the public on board with that. But I think it is coming. I think the first stage of it will be the wearable devices of various sorts, and eventually it's going to be augmented reality through Google Glasses or some sort of equivalent. And eventually it will be, well, why are you wearing this technology when we can just embed it in you? And that will be the brain chip or its equivalent at some point. That is eventually where this is heading. And again, that will be connected through the Internet of Things to everything else via the 5G networks.
We've seen, and I mentioned this in Take Back Your Power, I included the clip, and you've talked about the Google's creepy line and Eric Schmidt's comment about implanting chips in people's brains when the technology is good enough, kind of with a little bit of a chuckle almost. So it seems like this is just embedded in the, I guess, the elite culture for, to move more and more towards that total control, total, logging and control and manipulation and whatever else that comes out of it from all this data. So just diving in, Internet of Things and privacy. Now, what are the implications of what you're describing of how everything would be interconnected in this plan?
Well, I think we can start by just taking a look at what has already been openly admitted about what the Internet of Things is going to be used for. And this is coming straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, from the then director of the CIA back in 2014, at a conference that was being hosted by In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's venture capital investment firm. Yes, such a thing exists. So people who are not familiar with it should look it up, In-Q-Tel. And at a summit that they were hosting, then director of the CIA, David Petraeus, openly boasted about the fact that the Internet of Things was going to be used as another vector by intelligence agencies for spying on the public. And this got picked up by Wired and other outlets that talked about the CIA admits that your dishwasher will spy on you, which kind of elicits a chuckle, doesn't it? I mean, it is kind of silly sounding, but this is the reality that we're moving into in the smart home, which people are more and more buying into literally at this point with their Google Nest or their Amazon Echo or their various implements that they're implanting in their house now, which people know are surveilling and spying on them and broadcasting that data back to corporate headquarters. Well, that is going to be an even greater treasure trove of personal information about you and your daily activities as more and more devices are connected into that smart home nexus. So you're going to have a dishwasher and a toaster and a fridge and a washing machine and lights and thermostat, and all of these devices are going to be connected in so that you can make your life more convenient. You can set things with your app. You can automate things. Your fridge will be able to order your favorite food when you run out and things like this. This is the way it's being sold to the public. Meanwhile, people like David Petraeus are talking about how, well, of course, the CIA is going to use this to spy on targets. And that was further confirmed in 2016 by the then director of national intelligence, James Clapper, who once again affirmed that the Internet of Things provides many possibilities, and one of them is that, yes, intelligence agencies will use this to target, track, locate, and surveil targets. And as we know, as has been revealed over the last few years, the targets that these intelligence agencies are targeting are essentially everyone. The NSA is collecting data wholesale on everyone and storing it. And now that's openly admitted and understood, but it's seen to be just a fact of life in this age. Well, that fact of life is fast catching up to us, because as I say, when every device and appliance and item that you own is broadcasting data about you and your activities at all times to corporate headquarters, and oh yeah, by the way, to intelligence agencies that are listening in, that means essentially every aspect of your life. There will be an open book. There will be no such thing as privacy possible. And again, this is only enabled because the 5G networks are able to carry that much data and to ultimately make this a reality. If that was not technologically possible, this would all be pie in the sky thinking. But we are getting to the point where with 5G enabling this will be a real possibility.
In my conversation with Dr. Timothy Sheckley as part of the summit, he encouraged everyone, first of all, watch that interview. He lays out the plan for how to wired alternatives to 5G and how local cities can take control of their infrastructure and provide and wire fiber to the home, to the businesses, so forth. And then there are technologies within the home that can facilitate wired connections. So help us to understand here, just to clarify this shift to wireless that seemed to have happened in the early 2000s from fiber, from a planned big rollout of fiber to wireless. The Internet of Things and all these privacy and surveillance concerns would not be possible with if everything was wired, correct?
Not to the extent that 5G enables. And that's for a couple of reasons, one of which could be psychological, in a sense, or at least technical, because, as I say, every single device and item and appliance and everything in your home having its own chip and ability to communicate with the Internet of Things obviously wouldn't be possible if we had to literally physically plug every single thing in. We might be persuaded to plug in a fridge or something that happens once in a while, but literally all your floor tiles and your sneakers and your hat and whatever else they want to put on the Internet of Things, people aren't going to be physically wiring that in. So yes, in order to enable literally everything you have, and I can't stress this enough, people think that this might be an exaggeration, but literally every can of Coke or whatever other poison that people are ingesting these days will have its own individual device embedded in it. Not a pack. If you buy a pack of Cokes, and it's not the pack, it's each individual can, so that again, it will be able to monitor your daily intake of everything that you do. And people who don't understand the privacy implications of that, I'm not sure how I could spell it out any more clearly than to say literally every aspect of your life and everything you do. And when you go to the toilet and everything else will be data that will be databased and collected and analyzed by artificial intelligence. But if you ever become a target of interest to the intelligence agencies, I'm sure they will individually be able to use that information on you in any number of ways to understand your habits, to track your networks, to know what you're talking about and who you're talking to, and eventually to be able to predict rather accurately what you're going to do based on what you're searching or what you're talking about with your friends or where you're going. Again, the level of control that this provides over people is almost unimaginable. And the best way to get a handle on it is probably to look at dystopian science fiction, because the things that people were warning about and were nightmares decades ago are turning into reality that people are almost eager for at this point. In 1948, George Orwell could write about 1984 and Big Brother and the telescreens, and they're in every home and they're watching you. Now people are literally buying objects that are spying on them, that they know are spying on them. Alexa, order me a dollhouse, and are inviting this technology into their home, which is something almost unimaginable for someone from a previous generation who would have thought of that as the ultimate nightmare.
When I was making Take Back Your Power in the closing stages in 2013 is when the Snowden story broke. And you have a really, I think, very empowering perspective on Snowden. But how it was, filtered through the media, or how the media, I think on purpose directed the story, was not to look at the data of what was actually being revealed so that something could be done about it, but is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Right? So it seems like that the way that was portrayed, perhaps even like subconsciously, psychologically, gave us the message that there's nothing really you can do about it. So how do you answer that question, James, if you explain all of these privacy implications and the fact that, this isn't done yet, we can still change this, right? But somebody might say, well, they already have all the data or whatever, or I'm not doing anything, illegal, or I don't mind being transparent. How do you respond to that?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge and understand that there are psychological operations underway to make the public accept and normalize this as a fact of life. Well, yes, it's spying on you, but what does it matter? I mean, who cares if they know what you're watching on TV or something? What does it really matter? And you're not doing anything wrong, so it doesn't matter anyway, right? That attitude is being actively inculcated right now as part of a coordinated propaganda campaign. Mm-hmm. And I would like to think that that's readily apparent. But if not, then yes, studying something like the reaction to the Snowden revelations, which I always put in quotation marks because there were other NSA whistleblowers before Snowden who revealed much of this information, who don't seem to get as much of the spotlight, which is interesting in and of itself, because as you say, they make it about the person rather than about the details, schmeetails. Is this guy a good guy? Was he a traitor? They spin the conversation off, which is part of, I think, of that propaganda campaign. But the interesting, I guess, ramification of the fact that there is a coordinated psychological campaign being waged against the public to get them to normalize and accept this technology and the spying is that your opinion matters. Your psychological relation to this technology is an important point, so much so that there will be active coordinated campaigns to try to get you to see and to embrace this technology in a certain way. Mm-hmm. If your opinion didn't matter, they wouldn't be so actively trying to sway your opinion on issues like this. And so what the question then is, well, what stance or what position can we take that will actually empower us, that will actually bring the power of this technology? And I'm not a Luddite, and I don't think technology is evil or that we should avoid it. But obviously we have to embrace it in the right way, for the right reasons, and knowing that it can be used this way or that way, or in a different way. And so if we embrace something consciously and with intention, we can direct that technology in the direction that would be good for humanity. So it does involve what I call boycotts and boycotts. It involves actively supporting things. It doesn't necessarily have to do with monetary exchange. I mean, we could be talking about free and open source software, for example, or things like that. But supporting things that are in line with our ideals and not buying the things that are spying and surveilling us. And I don't look at this from a position on the clouds, I'm so perfect and everyone should be like me. So certainly not. I have a pocket slave device. I know it, not only is it irradiating me and all of that, but I know it's tracking and surveilling and spying on me. I am not perfect either. I do insist that my next phone will be a flip phone, but for the time being, I've got the little tracker in my pocket, so I'm not floating on a cloud about this. But at any rate, I don't have Alexa or Echo, Google Nest, or any of these other devices that are now being normalized in my home. And it honestly, I'm getting detached enough from the general culture to the point where I have to be reminded there are people who want that technology in their home. For me, it is still the nightmare. I still look at it from that perspective. Why would you invite that spying technology into your home? But I get that there are people who are enticed by it. Oh, it's so great. I can Google things on the fly by asking Alexa, or I can order things, and it's so easy and convenient. So it is a choice that we have to make to, okay, how far are we going to immerse ourselves in this technology, and when are we going to start pushing back and saying no and taking our power back? When will that happen, and what line do we draw, and will we stick up to it in the face of overwhelming social pressure? Oh, you're one of those weird conspiracy theorists that thinks the government's spying on them. Oh, the government is spying on you? Well, you're still weird for thinking that's weird. or not only the social pressure, but as I say, the convenience. It will be more and more convenient to get along with these technologies. It will be more and more difficult to live without these technologies. More and more jobs and positions will depend on you being able to be on Facebook, to carry the little slave device, to participate in these technologies. So it will get harder and harder. And so we have to draw a line somewhere, and we have to start pushing back. Because if we do not, then unfortunately it's the herd immunity type of situation where, yes, you personally might be opting out of these technologies, but 99% of the people around you will be, and the 5G network will be going up around you. So there's no way to physically avoid it.
Yeah, which is why spreading this awareness and information is so important, that we get together and organize and self-organize and like you said, draw a line in the sand. Very good. When Tom Wheeler, FCC chair at the time in 2016, was so excited to announce 5G, he was talking about tens of billions of dollars, and we have to be the first. And now we're seeing this new Cold War of that Trump's talking about, USA versus Russia. We got to win the race to 5G. How big, have you heard any numbers, James, or dug into the research and maybe verified? How big do you think this new economy is, this 5G, Internet of Things, surveillance capitalism related economy? How much money and financial motivation are we talking about here?
I've heard various figures thrown around, and I'm certainly no economist, so I wouldn't venture to guess which one of them is correct or even in the ballpark. But perhaps it's one of those things that we can't even properly fathom at this point, because there are certain things that are invaluable, or at least unestimatable, but also because I think there's a lot of hype that goes around trying to sell this technology to the public. But one thing that I probably agree with people like Wheeler, who in his press conference in 2016 said, when everything is connected to the internet, from your cell phone to your watering can, who knows what the next big app will be, or the next killer app that this technology will enable will be. And he has a point. We don't really even know what's going to take off and what kind of things are going to be enabled through this yet, because there's, again, it pervades our life in a way that we can't even begin to fathom at this point. And as much as this technology and 4G networks enabled all sorts of things that people wouldn't have expected even a decade ago, things like Uber and Lyft and these types of things that are changing the economy in ways that we're only starting to grasp. But now the technology is moving on, and it's going to be something else. So I don't think it's really estimatable, but it is going to be a profound effect. And as you say, every step of it will be monetized to the point where data, as I have pointed out on my podcast before, and is becoming something of a coined term at this point, data is the new oil. In the way that oil was the lifeblood of the economy in the early part to the mid part of the 20th century, even late 20th century, in the 21st century, data is going to be an important part of the economic matrix that we're living in. As information is power, information is the new currency. Well, data is the new oil, and people are going to make incredible fortunes off of it. And we're already, of course, starting to see that with the Silicon Valley big tech giants, billionaires arising from the pile out of this. So it is a new economy, and how big it will be, who knows? But then again, that's just, how many zeros on the end of that figure. Does it really matter at the end? What is the money anyway? It's dead. So there's a number of things to examine when we try to, keep points on the scoreboard with dollars and cents. At a certain point, it doesn't even matter. The point is the power that comes with it. Money is essentially about power. And when people are playing at that level of the game, when you're starting to talk about the billions and trillions, eventually it's just about the power that you have over people.
Yeah. So on the other hand, I mean, I'm starting to see this. What are your thoughts on this? The idea that with all of these problems associated with 5G, and for example, we're seeing carriers move away, some of them, indications moving away from millimeter wave technology because it doesn't go through walls, because they need it every few homes, and just higher, raising up the power, and realization that there are health effects. Even the IEEE website is talking about health effects from millimeter wave radiation. So are you seeing the potential as we get involved in this conversation and help to shift it and to wake people up for a bubble and bubble bursting situation with all of this investment and all this big push for 5G, and nobody really knows what it is.
It is possible. It hasn't happened yet. This isn't set in stone. So I certainly do think it is absolutely possible that this agenda, that is clearly a driven agenda, can be derailed. And the health issue and the health effects that are now becoming undeniable is certainly one of those vectors. And it is starting to catch on in the general public awareness. And I am seeing signs of that. And that is to the good. But I think there's also a trap that we can stumble into here with if the health effects are the only thing about this technology that we concentrate on, and we miss the surveillance factor that is also enabled by these technologies, then if they can demonstrate the safety of the technology, or at least for the normie, the average population are, well, it's good enough and it probably won't cause cancer. If they can demonstrate something like that, or if they could replace it with a different technology that has the same properties but doesn't have the health effects, then there's no reason to oppose it, right? I mean, it is good to have this constant flow of data and everything connected to everything else in the Internet of Things. That is a good thing. The only problem is the health effects. Well, if we can put the health effects to the side, then there's no reason to oppose it. Well, no, that's not true. The Internet of Things is a nightmare, a nightmare in terms of our ability to live our lives in anything approaching freedom. Freedom from constant surveillance and control, because again, something that I've gestured towards in this conversation, but I hope people will cogitate on, is that the amount of data that we're talking about in terms of the micro understanding of every activity that you do is data that can be used predictively. And people who are interested in that concept should look at even some things that have come out publicly about things that are going on in the skunk works of the Pentagon. There was a project whose name I'm not going to remember off the top of my head, but there was a project for constructing essentially a simulated reality that was going to take in all of this information that they were already collecting at that time, and that we're talking about a decade ago that Wired and other mainstream publications were writing about this project, taking all of the data that they were scooping up from whatever it was, whatever sources they admit and what they don't, your emails and your telephone calls and your mail and your credit card transactions and everything else, and putting that into basically a simulated profile of you. And I say you as an individual because this program was going to try to construct a simulation of the real world and every single person in it, which sounds insane and is insane if you think about it, unless you have the type of data that is enabled with the 5G network, with the Internet of Things, where you really can start to construct profiles of every single person on the planet. It's a mind-boggling task. And the idea of this, and again, this is not coming from me, this is coming from mainstream sources. I know Wired did report on it at the time. The idea of this was they were going to start using that to predict future events, because with that amount of data coming in constantly in real time, you can start to see patterns and you can start to make predictions about what is going to happen. And that is, again, it sounds like science fiction fantasy, but the more that you look at the way that this is being directed, the more, at any rate, people in positions of power do believe that this is possible with artificial intelligence and other things that are coming to data mine your personal individual profiles. It's extremely unsettling to think about. And I think the one thing we have to underline in this conversation is that the reason that this is being done, there is a guiding ideology behind this. And it's one called technocracy that I hope people listening to this conversation will be familiar with. But if not, this was a philosophy that was developed in the early part of the 20th century. It was actually formalized in the 1930s with the incorporation of a group called Technocracy Inc. It was co-founded by Howard Scott, who was something of a charlatan and a con man, but apparently a very good talking one, or an effective one, because he got many people, including M. King Hubbert, who many people might remember as Hubbert's Peak, i.e. peak oil, the geophysicist at Shell who came up with the concept of peak oil in the 1950s. Well, back in the 1930s, he was one of the co-founders of Technocracy Inc. with Howard Scott. They were literally roommates at one point. And M. King Hubbert wrote Technocracy Inc.'s Bible, called the Technocracy Study Course, where at that time, in the 1930s, they were talking about how in order to have a technocracy, i.e. a community which was going to be run by scientists and engineers and economists and people with special knowledge of certain things so they can precisely scientifically order society and make a utopia, of course. Well, their idea was in order to do that, they were going to need information on everything in the economy in real time. They were going to have to know what was being manufactured, how much energy input did it take, how is it being sold, where, for what price, who's buying it, and where is it moving, and how are people using it and consuming it. All of this information, if they could collect it all and analyze it in real time, they'd be able to use that in order to perfectly balance society and to direct it in the best way that the scientists could to make everything happy, blah, blah, blah. Well, it sounded, I'm sure, like absolute crackpot insanity in the 1930s to be talking about it. Fast forward less than a century, and here we are talking now about the Internet of Things, where literally everything that is manufactured will have its own address and have its own chip and will be connected to the Internet of Things and monitored and tracked in real time, giving all of this data to central bureaucracies of various sorts, intelligence agencies and others, in order to enable the technocratic dream. Now, of course, people like Howard Scott and M. King Hubbert may have forwarded this philosophy because they genuinely believed that scientists could perfectly order society and make everyone happy. But unfortunately, as always, there are other people who are paying the bills of the people like Howard Scott and M. King Hubbert. Again, Hubbert literally working for Shell Oil. People who pay the bills of these idealists might have different agenda items that they want to tick off when it comes to a philosophy like this and what they are going to do with that data. So I think this is part of the explanation for the headlong rush towards 5G. This is the reason why we're never going to get a reasonable answer from the people who are pushing this agenda as to, well, why now? Why do we have to do it right now? Why can't we just hold off a few years? Let's do some more tests. Why don't we have an open debate about this? No, it has to be done right now. I think it's because they are rushing towards the implementation of an agenda that they've been working on for decades and decades behind the scenes. And I think if the public becomes aware of that, it might be harder to sell that to the public.
As part of the summit, I believe as mentioned, researcher Patrick Wood also speaks on technocracy. Would encourage everyone to check that out. Now, Patrick has done for decades research with, I believe, Anthony C. Sutton on the Trilateral Commission, going back to the early 70s. Zbigniew Brzezinski, key player in this technocratic movement that you talk about. Again, behind the scenes, David Rockefeller and Zbigniew coming together and basically forming the Trilateral Commission, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, back in the early 1970s. And then very shortly after the founding of the Trilateral Commission, they ended up essentially taking over the White House with the Jimmy Carter administration being comprised almost entirely of Trilateral Commission members. The cabinet members were almost all trilaterals for a brand new group. It's surprising how quickly they essentially gained control of the White House.
Wow. And then even in the mainstream media was reporting that behind the scenes, Brzezinski was a mentor, a guide to President Obama during his time in office. So having been groomed at an early age makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to read for our audience here. Zbigniew Brzezinski, quote from Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. Was this 1973 also, James? Do you know the approximate date on his book?
I believe it's 1970, but I'd have to double check that. Okay.
So this is the quote from 1970. The technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date, complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. And a second quote, a little bit shorter here. In the technotronic society, the trend would seem to be towards the aggregation of the individual support of millions of uncoordinated citizens so herding and controlling people, easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities, PR being sold for selling it to us, exploiting the latest communications techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason. This is the most critical agenda that we really need to become aware of in terms of what's happening on the planet right now and how we are being engineered to, as you have already stated, accept this new normal where people no longer have rights, essentially, where there was a court case, I believe, in 2018 to do with smart meter data and privacy, and now courts are balancing the rights of the individual with the greater good. You know, can you talk a little bit about this, more about this mindset and about this side of things here?
Well, there's an interesting addendum to those Brzezinski quotes, and perhaps that helps us to take a little bit of our power and put this in a more positive framework. If several decades later, so about a decade ago in 2007 or 8, Brzezinski was on the talk circuit at that time, talking at a number of events and even penning an op-ed for the International Herald Tribune about a different era that we've moved into in the internet age. And the point that he was making was essentially that in the internet age, the ability to transmit information and to spread awareness, like what we are doing, hopefully, with this conversation and ones like it, is transforming the world. It is politicizing populations in a way that had never really been experienced before. So millions and upon millions of people are becoming more politically aware and engaged, which he saw as a problem, obviously, because now we have many more people trying to take up a slice of this pie that was previously the realm of the trilaterals and a very select few. So how do we deal with this problem? And he made the interesting point that it used to be easier to control 1 million people than to kill 1 million people. But that calculus might be flipping. It might be easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. Please look this up. He really did talk about this, and there's recordings of it. It's a chilling statement for someone like Zbigniew Brzezinski, who has been in and around the corridors of power for decades. He's recently deceased, but who was a very high up member of the cabal that has been steering this and the technocratic mindset, to talk about so blithely about, well, yes, we have reached a point where it might be easier to kill 1 million people than to control them. And what does that mean for our position in all of this as we approach this era where we're starting to make very important decisions about how we move forward with this technology? The technology that might be the literal technology of our own enslavement and potentially our own destruction. Some pretty important choices we're making, I hope you'll grant. So I think that if there is a positive message from this, it is once again that what is it that these technocrats and these micromanagers, would-be micromanagers of society, fear? It is an aware and engaged population. This is what they spend their time thinking about. More people are becoming politically active and aware and engaged, and they're talking to each other through this technology, and this might be a problem. How do we control this problem? Well, it is a problem for them because we can make a difference. And what we choose to do, what we choose to buy or not to buy, who we choose to interact with, what ideas we take on board, what we do, the way we act in the world does make a difference. And these people at the very top are not all-seeing gods that can manipulate reality in whatever way they wish. They too have to influence the public to go along with it and essentially to accept their own enslavement and perhaps their own destruction. Well, let's not accept that. And if we do start digging in our heels, we can make a difference on these issues.
Yeah, well said. And I would add to that list an action that I'm seeing, that we are, as an organization, are seeing as a very powerful and prominent step for us to take, is a blanket awareness campaign onto and toward our elected officials, because they're getting lobbied by industry. The wireless industry and the energy utility industry are, two of the 3 biggest industries on the planet, and they are not made aware by enough people so far, but that's starting to change now. And so that's what this summit is really helping to facilitate, is like the actions to our elected reps to not only inform them and say, look, we're all in this together. Like nobody gets out gets a get out of jail free card on this. So that's why we're seeing a lot of local governments really, start to begin to sue the FCC, begin to pass legislation in other countries. This is going very strongly as well. So jumping in, James, we need to wrap up in a few minutes, but I have 3 questions, and if we could do these each in, say, a couple minutes, that would be great. Touching in on the Chinese social credit system already, speaking of control and surveillance, what can you tell us as far as what's going on in China, and is that same controlling system, the groundwork being laid in the United States and other countries, and if so, what is its relation to 5G?
Right. So for people who are unaware, in China right now, they are starting to roll out, and it already exists in some form and is being used, basically a system of control that is not overt boots in your face control. It is a point system where you can earn points, social credit points, if you do things that the government approves of, and you will be docked points if you do things that the government does not like. And it sounds rather innocuous. Well, it's just social credit points. I mean, it's not like they're putting you in jail or anything. It could be worse. Well, actually, it's even more insidious than actually being physically enslaved, because at that point, people tend to revolt. But when it is a system of control that is based on rewarding this behavior and punishing that behavior in a nebulous way that people can't necessarily connect to their lives, it can be brought in as a exceptionally impactful way of controlling a society as large as China with over 1 billion people. How do you corral all of those cats? Well, if you have something like a social credit score. So now people are literally being banned, for example, from flying or taking high-speed trains and other infrastructure because they are deemed a risk because their credit score is too low. And so people, it's interesting to see the mainstream media reaction to this and portraying it from the Western perspective. Oh, look at what those evil Chinese are doing. But obviously there are aspects of this that are coming in at home, not only actual literal ones, like in Canada right now, there are things like the Carrot app. It's rewarding people for, taking a jog or getting your vaccines or doing other things that the government tells you is good as fresh air. It's so good for you. You have to do it, and we'll give you some points. So that is already starting to come in, but even in less obvious ways, or at least less score-based ways. For example, with the recent waves of social media censorship of various sorts, banning people for having political wrongthink or saying the wrong words is a form of controlling people's behavior through the technology. And that is one of the key aims, I think, of the technocratic, I shouldn't use the term elite, the technocrats, is they want to control people through the technology, control their behavior so that they don't even have to predict what you're going to do. Essentially, they're going to shape what you are going to do by giving you certain choices and making you choose the easy path rather than the hard path.
Can you talk about if the climate change and environmental movement has been hijacked by corporate interests and a Hegelian dialectic?
They certainly have, and that's a very big story, and one that I tell in a couple of documentaries called How and Why Big Oil Conquered the World, available for free at corbettreport.com/big oil, so please take a look at that. But essentially, the answer is yes. The environmental movement was not just hijacked. In many ways, it was really, if not founded, at least brought into existence in the way that we know it by literal card-carrying eugenicists, people like Julian Huxley, brother of Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, who was the director of UNESCO, the founder of UNESCO, who was also a card-carrying eugenicist. Eugenics is an exceptionally important part of this story, and it gives another mindset into this technocratic class of people that are pushing 5G and these other technologies. Essentially, the idea that their genes are just so much better that they deserve to rule over everyone else, which is a type of scientific gloss on the old divine right of kings and other justifications for elite rule. Well, now in the scientific age, it's your genes. And this is a late 19th century pseudoscience. It's quackery, but it was very, very popular among very rich people for obvious reasons. Oh, yes, we do deserve to rule over everyone. Unfortunately, that mindset never left the elite class. Again, I shouldn't use that term. The people who have money and power. It never left them, but it did get sullied by things like, and the Nazis and World War II and what have you. So they can't use the term eugenics anymore. It became about overpopulation. There's too many people, too many poor people, too many poor brown people. We need to, kind of get rid of that and have more of the good kind of people breeding. So they kind of just changed the mask. And then with the rise of environmental awareness and the ecology in the 1960s, Silent Spring, Rachel Carson, and things like that, essentially that movement was taken over by these very same people. Again, for the same purpose of trying to direct society towards culling of the excess population and raising up of the better sort. And you can see this in the founders of WWF, the World Wildlife Federation, and these other types of things. Again, it's an interesting mix of literal oil barons and eugenicists, often the same thing, merging to direct the whole environmental movement, which is now almost synonymous. It's almost 100% about carbon dioxide, interestingly enough. But of course, because that is a choke point of the economy, if you can control energy, then you essentially control the economy. If you control the economy, you can control the direction of humanity itself. And that was something that the oil barons learned in the late 19th century by monopolizing the oil industry. We control energy, we control the world, essentially. Well, they're just trying to do that in a different form for the post-carbon world that we're moving into, where everything will be so green and wonderful and merged with everything else in the Internet of Things, so that there can be a constant surveillance of everything going on in the economy. But it's only for good things. It's only so that we can, reduce bad energy and get green energy or something like that. It's good for you. Just don't question it.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how these same sort of string pullers have, for example, controlled and exerted their control over the U.S. Patent Office and other international patent agencies, which have, we now know, systematically suppressed certain technologies, more than 5,000 in the U.S. Patent Office alone, that are deemed to be not in the interest of national security. National security, so reinterpret that as the corporate national, we know it's a corporation, corporate security. So isn't that interesting? So, and also, I would encourage everyone out there to do an internet search and look up Al Gore, world's first carbon billionaire, New York Times. Suffice it to say. James, are you supportive of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
I differentiate the two because Bitcoin is a form of crypto, but crypto is not Bitcoin. And I stress this because Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and digital currency and blockchain and all of these words tend to get thrown in one basket and lumped together. And I think that's part of a psychological operation to essentially make the public think that it's all the same thing, so that eventually when there is FedCoin and, hey, the federal government is going to give you this wallet to take, it's like this Bitcoin thing you've been hearing about. So just take this wallet and you can do all your transactions that way. That is the nightmare of total surveillance of the economy, where literally everything will be tracked and stored in a database forever, and it will be personally identifiable in your name by the central government or whoever hands you the wallet. That's the exact opposite of the reason that cryptocurrencies were first created and propounded, which was to escape the central bank system. So it's an interesting, like so many technologies, it's the double-edged sword, and one way it cuts the population, one way it cuts the banks. Which way do you think the banks are going to try to wield that? Of course, it's going to be trying to cut the population. So I'm very wary about the ways the Bitcoin specifically is being steered by Blockstream, which, as you'll find out if you go do the research, is funded by AXA, which has a Henry de Castries at the top. And where is he? Oh, he's also on the Bilderberg Steering Committee. So there are some very, very shady things going on in the crypto world right now. But I still believe that there is the intention behind crypto, or at least the one that many people signed on to when they first heard about cryptocurrency. And the reason why it became such a grassroots phenomenon is because it does offer an alternative to the economy that's been built up around us. I always say an alternative because people are always looking for the, pardon the pun, silver bullet, as if everything has to be crypto, or everything has to be gold, or everything has to be something or other. I say there are many options on the table, and we should use all of them because they have different use cases and different things. So cryptocurrency is a thing which I think can be used in the right way, like so many other technologies. It can be used for good. It can also be used to construct the perfect prison. And I know which way they're trying to steer it right now. So I want people to be very careful about these sorts of things and start to learn the nuance of things like, what is Bitcoin? What is cryptocurrency? What is blockchain? What do these different terms mean, and how are they being used? And start to pay attention to that, because you'll see some interesting things.
Anything specifically as far as guidance for humanity on how we could do the cryptocurrency in a way to ensure that it's in the good of people and protecting individual rights?
The absolute key, the bottom baseline of this, is it has to be an open, permissionless network in order for it to have any meaning as a cryptocurrency in the sense that we want, where it will be pseudonymous. People should not think that this is anonymous. It's pseudonymous. Every transaction will be traceable to an address. An address is not necessarily a person, though. A person may have millions of addresses. An address may be a million people. There are many different ways for this to be arranged, and it can be done in a way that it protects your individual anonymity more or less. But again, we have to think about all of those nuances. But again, the network itself has to be open and permissionless. What they're trying to do is create these controlled networks that are going to be essentially governed and dictated by the central banks and watched over by various institutions. And they're going to sell it as it's the same thing. Don't look at what my left hand is doing. Oh, here you go. And now here's a wallet. Take this. And so if we understand, is this open? Is this permissionless network? Or is this going to be a closed blockchain, which is going to be administered by a central bank? These are important distinctions. And unfortunately, the way Bitcoin is being steered right now, in order to solve the problem of, well, we don't want to settle transactions on chain, so we'll do it off chain. And how do we do that? Oh, we'll start a Lightning network. And so suddenly we start to get these ideas of the essential reason why something like Bitcoin exists, which is to facilitate transactions without the need for a middleman. Well, it's a little bit easier if we slip a middleman in there. And, well, there's a middleman, so of course they have to have KYC, know your customer, so that, now you have to send in, your blood sample and your next of kin and whatever it is in order to get an account so that you can now trade. Everything that this was supposed to be against suddenly is being embraced. And that's the thing we have to understand. When that sleight of hand happens, suddenly we don't want to be part of that system. So again, we have to look at the ways that it's being used and the types of terms that are being used, because a lot of this is just meant to confuse the public.
Really good, James. It's been so good to just talk about this with you. Thank you so much for your insight and your wisdom. Just in closing, are you optimistic? And if so, what are some keys for humanity to ensure a positive future?
Well, let me go back to a point we've made a couple of times in this conversation, which is that if our opinions and our actions didn't matter, I don't think these people would be trying to influence them so heavily. And so we do have a part to play in this, whether actively or passively. We can just sit back and let things happen, as is so easy to do, and then just accept whatever comes. But we know where that system is being directed, so we know where that will end up. Or we can stand up and try to do something about it. And I can't say the something that is, because there are many, many somethings that can be done about it. And it depends on the person. Each individual who is listening to this conversation will have their own perspective, their own experience, their own skills, their own talents, their own strengths, their own weaknesses. You know what it is you can do. And the thing you can do could be anything. I don't know, painting a painting or whatever it is that you do. There's a way that you can do that and harness that to helping to spread awareness about these issues and helping to combat the issues. Or there are ways you can do it to just go along with the system in order to succeed on the terms that the system provides. And so I think we all understand when it is we're selling out and when it is we're doing the right thing. And I think if we have that awareness and that consciousness, once you have this information, it's your choice what to do with it. And I'm telling you, you can make a difference by standing up and being an example for others and showing that other people, you're not crazy for thinking there's something going on here. Maybe I should, at the very least, just step back. Don't participate in this thing. Don't buy into this thing. Don't jump on the bandwagon. Just doing that can be an example that other people will see and that can have a ripple effect on society in ways that you might not even be able to comprehend. But do this knowing that you are making a difference and that your mind and the way that you interact with other people and the things that you believe, the things that you buy, the things that you do, the things that you talk about, the people that you talk to, all of that makes a difference. And it is something that if you start directing your conscious attention to it, it will have an effect. And people like Zbigniew Brzezinski and others will worry about this problem of too many people starting to take back their power. Uh-oh, what are we going to do about it? And that's the position we want them to be in, running away instead of running towards their goal.
And we talked briefly just before the start of the call about worldviews or consciousness or spiritual perspectives and so forth. But really it comes down to valuing the essence of life, of family, of those things that matter, and really taking a stand for life. Not that we're focusing on fighting something evil like this, but we're really standing for life. And we're choosing, it's almost like we don't know the outcome, right, James? I mean, there's no guarantee of if we take action, it's going to produce a specific result or success at this point with all that's going on. There's no guarantee of a specific outcome, but it's the right thing to do, isn't it? And it's trusting in and choosing to align with a benevolent future, trusting in the benevolent force, call it God or Creator or, the force. And it's choosing to align with that and then acting accordingly, isn't it? I mean, you seem like you've been doing that for a while now, just speaking truth and offering it out there. Your website, I would encourage everyone to go to corbettreport.com and please consider donating via James's Patreon page and supporting his work, because he's getting regular content out, and get on his email list for sure and help his work go viral too. So, James, thank you again so much for joining us today on the summit, and let's definitely keep in touch, and we'll be following your work.
Thank you so much.